Jake Morrison had always been different from other kids growing up in small-town Montana. While his classmates played video games and watched movies, Jake spent his afternoons practicing rope tricks in his grandfather's barn. His grandfather, William Morrison, had been a real cowboy back in the day, working cattle ranches across the American West before settling down to raise a family at 25 years old. Jake had become something of a local legend in his hometown. Of Cedar Creek, he could lasso a fence post from 50 feet away, perform intricate rope-spinning tricks that amazed crowds at county fairs, and had even won several regional rodeo competitions. His skills with a lasso were so impressive that people often said he could rope anything that moved. Jake worked as a ranch hand for the largest cattle operation in the county. But his real dream was to become a professional rodeo performer. Had been saving money for years to travel the country, competing in major rodeo events, and hopefully making a name for himself in the world of professional cowboys. His bedroom was filled with trophies, ribbons, photographs from various competitions. Where his roping skills had earned him recognition, the opportunity that would change everything came. When Jake's cousin Danny called him with exciting news. Danny worked for a travel company that organized tours to Europe, and they were looking for someone to perform authentic American cowboy demonstrations for tourists in London. The pay was good. It would cover Jake's travel expenses, plus give him a chance to see the world beyond Montana. Jake had never been outside the United States, but the idea of showing off his cowboy skills in England seemed like the adventure he had been waiting for. He packed his best ropes, his grandfather's old leather chaps, and his most authentic-looking cowboy hat. His family and friends gathered at the airport to send him off, all excited to see their local hero represent American cowboy culture in a foreign country. The flight to London was Jake's first time on an airplane, and everything about the experience amazed him. The bustling airports, the different accents he heard, and the view of the English countryside. As they landed, all made him feel like he was stepping into a completely different world. Danny met him at the airport and explained the details of his job. During the drive into the city, Jake would be performing cowboy demonstrations at various tourist locations around London, showing visitors how real American cowboys used ropes for cattle work. The performances were designed to be educational and entertaining, giving tourists a taste of authentic Western American culture. Danny had already arranged several locations, including spots near famous landmarks where tourists would be most likely to gather and watch. On his first day in London, Jake was amazed by the history and architecture surrounding him everywhere he looked. The old buildings, the red buses, the formal way people dressed and spoke all seemed so different from his life back in Montana. He spent hours walking around the city, getting familiar with the locations where he would be performing and practicing his rope work in nearby parks. Jake's first few performances went extremely well. Tourists loved watching him demonstrate different types of lassos, rope spinning tricks, and the techniques cowboys used to catch cattle. Children were especially fascinated, and many adults asked questions about ranch life in America. Jake found himself enjoying the cultural exchange and the opportunity to share his skills with people from all over the world. After a week of successful performances, Jake began to feel confident and comfortable in his new environment. He started thinking about ways to make his demonstrations even more exciting and memorable for tourists. During his lunch breaks, he would walk around London, looking for new locations and ideas that might enhance his cowboy shows. It was during one of these exploratory walks that Jake first saw the British Royal Guards at Buckingham Palace. He stood with dozens of other tourists, watching the guards in their distinctive red uniforms and tall black hats standing perfectly still at their posts. Jake was impressed by their discipline and the tradition they represented. But as a cowboy, he also found himself wondering if his roping skills would work on targets other than fence posts and cattle. The idea started as just a curious thought. But as Jake watched the guards day after day during his walks, he began to imagine what it would be like to demonstrate his lasso skills using one of the guards as a target. He told himself it would just be a harmless demonstration of cowboy techniques, something that would surely entertain the crowds of tourists and maybe even impress the guards themselves with authentic American frontier skills. Jake spent the next few days observing the changing of the guard ceremonies and studying the routines of the royal guards. He noticed that they maintained perfect discipline and never broke character. Even when tourists tried to get their attention or take selfies nearby, this only made Jake more curious about whether he could get a reaction with his cowboy skills. In his mind, Jake convinced himself that what he was planning would be harmless entertainment. He had performed rope tricks for thousands of people back home, and everyone always enjoyed the show. Figured that demonstrating his lasso skills near the palace would be just another performance. Something that would delight tourists and maybe even become a popular attraction that the guards themselves would appreciate. Jake began planning his approach carefully. He studied the layout of the area around Buckingham Palace, noting where tourists typically gathered and where security personnel were positioned. He wanted to make sure his demonstration would be safe and entertaining without causing any real problems. In his hotel room, he practiced his most impressive rope tricks, preparing for what he imagined would be his most memorable performance yet. On a busy Saturday morning, Jake arrived at Buckingham Palace with his favorite lasso coiled neatly in his hand. The area was crowded with tourists from around the world, all taking photos and watching the guards with fascination. Jake positioned himself about 30 feet away from one of the guard posts, far enough to be respectful but close enough for his rope work to be clearly visible. Guard Captain Thomas Hartwell had been serving as a royal guard for 8 years. He had dealt with countless tourists, photographers, and occasional troublemakers, but he had never encountered anyone quite like the American cowboy who was now setting up what appeared to be some kind of performance near his post. Through his peripheral vision, he could see the man with the cowboy hat organizing his rope and attracting the attention of nearby tourists. Jake began his demonstration with some basic rope spinning, creating large circles with his lasso while explaining to the gathering crowd about cowboy techniques used on American ranches. The tourists were immediately interested, pulling out their phones to record this unexpected entertainment. Jake felt confident and excited as he saw the positive reaction from his audience. Gradually, Jake moved into more advanced tricks, spinning multiple loops and creating complex patterns with his rope. The crowd grew larger as people noticed the skilled cowboy performing near the palace. Jake was in his element, sharing stories about his grandfather and ranch life while demonstrating the practical uses of different lasso techniques. Captain Hartwell remained perfectly still at his post, but he was becoming increasingly concerned about the growing crowd and the unpredictable nature of the rope-spinning demonstration happening so close to his position. His training had prepared him for many situations, but none involving an American cowboy with a lasso performing unsanctioned entertainment near the palace gates. Jake, encouraged by the enthusiastic response from tourists, decided it was time for his grand finale. He had practiced this move hundreds of times back home, and it never failed to amaze audiences. He would demonstrate how cowboys could lasso a target from a distance, showing the precision and skill required for ranch work. In his excitement, Jake had convinced himself that this would be the perfect end to his impromptu show. He began spinning his lasso in preparation for the throw, explaining to the crowd how cowboys needed to be able to catch cattle from various distances and angles. The tourists watched with anticipation, many of them recording videos and taking photos of what they expected to be an impressive display of American frontier skills. Jake took aim at Captain Hartwell, planning to demonstrate his accuracy by lassoing around the guard's shoulders in a way that wouldn't actually touch or interfere with him. In his mind, this would show his incredible precision while creating a memorable moment that tourists would talk about for years to come. What Jake hadn't considered was how his actions would be interpreted by palace security personnel who were trained to treat any unusual behavior near the guards as a potential threat. As Jake prepared to throw his lasso, security cameras were already focused on him, and radio communications were alerting additional personnel to the developing situation. Captain Hartwell, still maintaining his disciplined stance, was mentally preparing for whatever was about to happen. His years of training had taught him to remain calm under pressure, but he had never imagined he would need to deal with a cowboy attempting to lasso him while he was on duty protecting the palace. Jake drew back his arm and released the lasso with the same fluid motion he had perfected over years of practice. The rope sailed through the air in a perfect arc, heading directly toward Captain Hartwell with the precision that had made Jake famous in rodeo competitions back home. The crowd of tourists held their breath, cameras capturing what they thought would be an amazing display of cowboy skill, however. Just as the lasso was about to reach its target, something completely unexpected happened. A strong gust of London wind, common around the tall buildings near the palace, caught the rope and threw it off course. Instead of landing harmlessly around the guard's shoulders as Jake had planned, the lasso veered to the left and wrapped around a nearby ceremonial flagpole. The sudden change in trajectory caught everyone by surprise, including Jake, who had never experienced such unpredictable wind conditions during his performances in Montana. As he tried to adjust and pull his rope back, the lasso tightened around the flagpole, creating a situation he had never encountered before. The rope was now tangled in a way that would require careful maneuvering to free it. Captain Hartwell, who had been mentally prepared for the rope to come his way, was equally surprised by this turn of events. While he maintained his disciplined posture, he couldn't help but notice the American cowboy now struggling with his equipment in a way that suggested this hadn't been part of his planned demonstration. The crowd of tourists began murmuring among themselves, some laughing at the unexpected outcome, while others pulled out their phones to capture Jake's predicament. What had started as a confident demonstration of cowboy skills was quickly turning into an embarrassing situation that Jake had no experience handling. Palace security personnel, who had been monitoring the situation closely, now faced an unusual dilemma. While Jake's actions had been inappropriate and potentially dangerous, it was clear that he was now stuck dealing with his own mistake rather than posing any continued threat to the guards. They decided to approach the situation carefully, assessing whether Jake needed assistance or should be asked to leave immediately. Jake tugged on his rope, trying various techniques he knew for freeing tangled lassos, but the urban environment presented challenges he had never encountered on the ranch. The flagpole was smooth metal, and the wind continued to complicate his efforts to untangle the rope. Sweat began forming on his forehead as he realized he was creating exactly the kind of scene he had hoped to avoid. Two security officers approached Jake calmly but purposefully. They identified themselves and politely asked him to explain what he was doing and whether he had permission to perform demonstrations on palace grounds. Jake, still struggling with his tangled rope, tried to explain that he was a professional cowboy performer hired to entertain tourists around London. The security officers listened patiently as Jake explained his background and his intentions, but they made it clear that unsanctioned performances near the palace were not permitted, especially ones that could potentially interfere with the guards' duties. They were professional and courteous, but firm in their authority to maintain order and safety around the royal residence. As Jake continued working to free his lasso, a small crowd had gathered to watch the unusual situation unfold. Among the tourists was an elderly gentleman who had been quietly observing the entire scene from the beginning. He approached the security officers and asked if he could speak with them privately about the young American cowboy. The elderly man introduced himself as Colonel William Davies, retired military officer who had spent many years working with international cultural exchange programs. He explained that he had been watching Jake's demonstration and could see that the young man was skilled and well-intentioned. Despite his poor judgment in choosing this particular location for his performance, Colonel Davies suggested that rather than simply removing Jake from the premises, perhaps this could be turned into a positive cultural exchange opportunity. He pointed out that Jake's cowboy skills were genuinely impressive and that his obvious respect for the guards, despite his misguided approach, showed character that deserved consideration rather than punishment. The security officers appreciated Colonel Davies' perspective, but they still needed to resolve the immediate situation. Jake's lasso remained tangled around the flagpole, creating an ongoing distraction that needed to be addressed. They asked Jake to stop trying to free the rope himself and to step back while they determined the best way to handle the situation. Jake complied with their request, feeling embarrassed and worried about the consequences of his actions. He had come to London with dreams of sharing his cowboy heritage and skills with international audiences, but instead he found himself in trouble with palace security and facing the possibility of being banned from performing anywhere in the city. While the security team worked to untangle Jake's lasso from the flagpole, Colonel Davies continued his conversation with the officers about the young American. He explained that he had extensive experience working with cultural ambassadors and performers from various countries. He could see that Jake possessed both genuine skill and sincere respect for British traditions. Despite his poor judgment in this particular situation, Captain Hartwell, still maintaining his post but able to observe the ongoing discussion, found himself impressed by Jake's obvious expertise with the rope and his respectful demeanor while dealing with the consequences of his actions. The guard had dealt with many troublemakers over the years, but Jake's behavior suggested someone who had made an honest mistake rather than someone seeking to cause problems or disrespect. Colonel Davies proposed an unusual solution to the security officers. He suggested that instead of simply banning Jake from the area, they could arrange for him to provide a proper demonstration of American cowboy culture at a more appropriate location. With official approval and proper supervision, this would satisfy the educational interest that many tourists had shown while ensuring that palace protocols were respected. The security team leader, Sergeant Matthews, was intrigued by Colonel Davies' suggestion, but needed to ensure that any arrangement would meet all safety and security requirements. He asked Jake about his background, credentials, and the company he was working with in London. Jake provided detailed information about his employer, his performance history, and his genuine desire to share American cowboy culture respectfully. After several phone calls to verify Jake's credentials and discuss the situation with higher authorities, Sergeant Matthews returned with an unexpected proposal. The palace administration was willing to consider allowing Jake to provide an educational demonstration about American frontier skills, but it would need to be conducted at a designated area away from the guard posts, with proper advance notice and official supervision. Jake was amazed by this turn of events. What had started as a potentially serious problem was now turning into an opportunity that exceeded his original hopes. He would not only be allowed to continue his performances in London, but he would have official recognition and a proper venue for sharing his skills with international visitors. Colonel Davies volunteered to help coordinate the arrangements, explaining that he had connections with various cultural organizations that would be interested in supporting authentic educational demonstrations. He saw Jake's situation as an opportunity to create a positive cultural exchange that would benefit both American and British understanding of each other's traditions. The process of setting up the official demonstration took several weeks, during which Jake continued his regular performances at other locations around London. However, now he had a new sense of purpose and responsibility, understanding that he would soon be representing American cowboy culture in an official capacity at one of the world's most prestigious locations. During this waiting period, Jake received an unexpected visitor at his hotel. Captain Hartwell, now off duty and dressed in civilian clothes, had come to meet the American cowboy whose lasso had nearly landed around his shoulders. The guard introduced himself and explained that he had been curious about Jake's background and skills ever since the incident at the palace. The two men sat in the hotel lobby, sharing stories about their respective backgrounds and careers. Captain Hartwell talked about his military service and his pride in serving as a royal guard, while Jake shared stories about growing up on Montana ranches and learning rope work from his grandfather. Despite their very different backgrounds, they found common ground in their dedication to preserving and honoring their respective traditions. Captain Hartwell admitted that he had been impressed by Jake's obvious skill with the lasso, even though the demonstration had been inappropriate for the location. He explained that he had never seen rope work performed with such precision and artistry, and he was genuinely curious about the techniques and training required to develop such abilities. Jake, in turn, expressed his deep respect for the discipline and dedication that the Royal Guards demonstrated every day. He apologized again for his poor judgment in attempting to include a guard in his demonstration without permission, acknowledging that he had not fully understood the protocols and responsibilities involved in the guard's duties. Their conversation lasted for several hours, evolving from an awkward first meeting into a genuine friendship. Based on mutual respect for each other's skills and commitment to excellence, Captain Hartwell even offered to attend Jake's upcoming official demonstration, both to show support and to learn more about American cowboy traditions. As they parted that evening, both men realized that Jake's misguided lasso attempt had led to something valuable that neither of them had expected. A cross-cultural friendship that bridged the gap between American frontier traditions and British military heritage. The day of Jake's official demonstration arrived with perfect London weather. Colonel Davies had arranged for the performance to take place in a designated area of St. James's Park, close enough to the palace for tourists to easily attend, but far enough away to ensure no interference with official duties. A small stage area had been set up with proper barriers and seating for spectators. Jake arrived early that morning, wearing his best cowboy attire and carrying the same lasso that had gotten tangled around the flagpole weeks earlier. Nervous but excited about this opportunity to properly showcase American cowboy culture to an international audience. The official nature of the event made it feel much more significant than his previous street performances. Colonel Davies had done an excellent job promoting the event through various cultural organizations and tourist information centers. The time Jake was ready to begin, nearly 200 people had gathered to watch, including families with children, elderly couples, and visitors from dozens of different countries. The diverse audience reminded Jake of why he had wanted to share his heritage with the world. Captain Hartwell arrived in civilian clothes, as promised, and positioned himself near the front where he could get a good view of the demonstration. Several other off-duty Royal Guards had joined him, curious to see the cowboy skills that had caused such an unusual situation at their workplace. Their presence both honored and motivated Jake to give his very best performance. Jake began his demonstration with a brief history of American frontier life, explaining how cowboys developed their rope skills out of practical necessity for managing cattle across vast open ranges. He described his grandfather's experiences and the traditions that had been passed down through generations of ranch families. The audience listened intently, many of them hearing authentic cowboy stories for the first time. The rope work demonstration that followed was flawless. Jake performed every trick he knew, from basic lasso throws to complex spinning patterns that created beautiful geometric shapes in the air. He demonstrated how cowboys caught cattle, secured loads on wagons, and used their ropes for countless daily tasks on the ranch. The precision and artistry of his skills amazed the international audience. What made this performance special was Jake's genuine enthusiasm for sharing his culture, combined with his newfound understanding of respect for his audience and location. Instead of trying to create viral moments or shocking stunts, he focused on education and authenticity, helping people understand the real history and practical applications behind the skills they were witnessing during the question and answer portion of his program. Jake was asked about his experience trying to lasso a Royal Guard. He handled the question with humor and humility, explaining how his poor judgment had led to an embarrassing situation, but also to unexpected friendships and opportunities. He emphasized the importance of respecting local customs and getting proper permissions before performing in foreign countries. Captain Hartwell stood up during the question session and publicly thanked Jake for his respectful approach to sharing American culture. He explained that the Royal Guards appreciated Jake's skills and his efforts to educate people about cowboy traditions, while also acknowledging the importance of following proper protocols around official duties and ceremonies. The interaction between Jake and Captain Hartwell fascinated the audience, many of whom had witnessed or heard about the original incident at Buckingham Palace. Seeing the American cowboy and British Guard showing mutual respect and friendship provided a powerful example of how cultural misunderstandings could be transformed into positive relationships through patience and goodwill. After the official demonstration ended, many audience members approached Jake with additional questions and requests for photos. Children were especially excited to meet a real cowboy, and Jake spent considerable time explaining his equipment and techniques to curious young visitors. Parents thanked him for providing their families with an authentic educational experience they would remember long after their London vacation ended. Colonel Davies congratulated Jake on the success of his performance and mentioned that several other cultural organizations had expressed interest in hosting similar demonstrations. The positive response had exceeded everyone's expectations, and there were already discussions about making Jake's cowboy educational programs a regular feature of London's international cultural offerings. As Jake packed up his equipment that afternoon, he reflected on how dramatically his situation had changed since that windy day when his lasso went astray at Buckingham Palace. What had started as a potentially serious mistake had evolved into meaningful opportunities, genuine friendships, and a deeper understanding of how to share his heritage respectfully with international audiences. Captain. His equipment back to the storage area, and they made plans to meet again soon. The guard was genuinely interested in learning more about American frontier history, while Jake wanted to understand more about British military traditions and the ceremonial aspects of the Royal Guard's duties. Over the following months, Jake's official cultural demonstrations became increasingly popular with tourists and London residents alike. Word spread through social media and travel websites about the authentic American cowboy who performed educational shows in St. James's Park. His programs were now booking weeks in advance, with families specifically planning their London visits around his demonstration schedule. The success of Jake's proper cultural exchange program led to invitations from schools, museums, and cultural centers throughout England. He found himself traveling across the country, sharing American frontier history and cowboy skills with diverse audiences who were eager to learn about authentic Western traditions. Each performance reinforced his understanding of how powerful respectful cultural sharing could be. Jake's friendship with Captain Hartwell had also continued to grow and develop in unexpected ways. The Royal Guard had introduced Jake to other military personnel who were interested in learning about American frontier history, while Jake had gained a deep appreciation for British military traditions and ceremonial duties. They often met for dinner to discuss their respective cultures and careers through Captain Hartwell. Jake learned about the extensive training and dedication required to serve as a Royal Guard. He discovered that these men and women were not just ceremonial figures, but highly trained security professionals who took their responsibilities very seriously. This knowledge made Jake even more grateful that his original mistake had been handled with such patience and professionalism. Captain Hartwell, meanwhile, had developed a genuine fascination with American cowboy culture that went far beyond Jake's rope tricks. He read books about the American frontier, watched documentaries about ranch life, and even began learning some basic rope techniques during his off-duty hours. The friendship had sparked a cultural curiosity that enriched both their lives. Most unexpected development came when Colonel Davies approached Jake with a unique opportunity. The British government was planning a cultural exchange program with several American states, and they were looking for authentic representatives of American frontier culture to participate in official events and educational programs. Jake's reputation and respectful approach had made him an ideal candidate for this prestigious appointment. Jake was honored but initially hesitant about such a significant responsibility. He had come to London as a simple cowboy performer hoping to make some money and see the world, but now he was being asked to serve as an official cultural ambassador. Colonel Davies and Captain Hartwell encouraged him to accept, pointing out that his genuine passion for his heritage and his proven ability to connect with diverse audiences made him perfect for the role. After careful consideration and discussions with his family back in Montana, Jake accepted the cultural ambassador position. This meant extending his stay in England indefinitely and taking on responsibilities that went far beyond entertainment performances. He would be working with educational institutions, government officials, and international organizations to promote understanding between American and British cultures. Jake's new role required him to study not just cowboy techniques and history, but also diplomacy, cultural sensitivity, and international relations. He enrolled in courses about cross-cultural communication and worked with mentors who helped him understand the broader implications of his work. The ranch hand from Montana was transforming into a sophisticated cultural representative. His first official assignment as a cultural ambassador was to organize a major American frontier exhibition at a prestigious London museum. Jake worked with historians, curators, and other cultural experts to create an authentic and educational display that would help British visitors understand the real history behind cowboy legends and frontier life. The exhibition was a tremendous success, attracting thousands of visitors and receiving positive reviews from cultural critics and historians. Jake had learned to present American frontier culture with the same respect and dignity that he had come to appreciate in British traditions. His grandfather's old cowboy equipment was displayed alongside historical artifacts and educational materials that told the complete story of American frontier development. On the anniversary of his failed attempt to lasso Captain Hartwell, Jake organized a special cultural celebration that brought together American and British traditions. Captain Hartwell participated in the event, demonstrating British military customs, while Jake shared American cowboy skills. The celebration symbolized how cultural misunderstandings could be transformed into mutual respect and friendship. Looking back on his journey from that embarrassing day at Buckingham Palace to his current role as a respected cultural ambassador, Jake often marveled at how a single mistake had changed the entire direction of his life. His failed lasso throw had taught him valuable lessons about respect, preparation, and the power of authentic cultural exchange. Jake's story became an inspiration to other performers and cultural representatives who learned about the importance of approaching international audiences with humility and genuine respect. He had discovered that sharing one's heritage effectively required not just skill and enthusiasm, but also deep understanding of and appreciation for the cultures and traditions of others. Years later, Jake would return to Montana as a changed man, carrying with him not just memories of his adventures in England, but a broader perspective on the world and a deep appreciation for the value of building bridges between different cultures through respectful dialogue and authentic sharing of traditions.